Okay, let's look back at our reference sheet for factoring. We have now learned four different methods to factoring. The first method is something that you'll use with any of your expressions that you're trying to factor, okay? And that's the greatest common factor. And that's where you look to see if there's something you can divide evenly into all of the terms, okay? And then we learned that there was a way, a technique that we could use if we had a two-term expression that we would like to factor. And then we explored two different ways that we can factor three-termed expressions. Okay, we call those quadratics. Um, and so we based our decision on which technique to use, whether the leading coefficient, that number in front of the x squared, in the standard form written as this quadratic, the a is representing that leading coefficient. Here over on this side, the a is just 1, okay? And so you get to use this shortcut method if the a is 1. If not, you have to use what we call the x method. Okay, so looking at this example over here, let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so the first thing you always want to do is ask yourself if there's anything you can factor out of 30, 27, and 6. And yeah, you can factor out a 3 from all of those things. So you pull that 3 out, and what are you left with? You're left with 10x squared minus 9x plus 2. Okay, so the remaining expression is a trinomial, okay? And since the leading coefficient is not 1, it's a 10, I have to use the x method, okay? And so what do you put on top? Well, you take the 10 times the positive 2. 10 times positive 2 is 20. And then the bottom gets to be the -9, that middle piece right there, okay? So make sure you're filling this x in with the right pieces or it will not work out. Okay, we need two numbers that multiply together to give you 20 and add together to give you -9. Since I'm multiplying to get a positive number and adding to get a negative number, I know both of my numbers are going to be negative, and that the two numbers that satisfy these are going to be -5 and -4. Okay, so from there, you're going to divide by that first number. Okay, you're going to divide by that a, and that was 10. Okay, so we'll divide by a and we'll simplify. So what do these fractions simplify to? Well, -4/10 you can divide out of 2, -2/5, and then -1/2. Okay, so I'm going to use these numbers to build my binomial. So I'm going to have 3 times, we have two binomials. And the way we do this, we start at the denominator. So I'm going to say 5, okay, 5x, and then go to the numerator, minus 2. And then here, we'll start at the denominator, 2x minus 1. Okay, so let's just go ahead and slide over to our notes. Okay, now this is going to be our final technique to being able to factor. And this will be when you have an expression with four terms. And so one thing that's kind of cool about this is we're going to be using a strategy that we've already learned. We're going to be using factoring out the greatest common factor, okay? But what we're going to do is we're actually going to do it twice, okay? And you'll see that. So we're just going to factor the greatest common factor twice. All right. So when you have four terms, and we're going to give you very specific polynomials where this works, okay, very specific ones where this is going to work. But what I want to do is I want to group my first two terms together, okay? And then I'm going to group my last two terms together. So in math, when we want to group something, what do? We just stick parentheses around them. Okay. Now, one thing to say too, guys, and we'll see this in next examples, always make sure you have a plus sign in between there. Um, a subtraction sign is a shortcut to writing plus a negative number. So we'll see that here in a second. So just always make sure you got a plus sign in between there. Okay, next what we want to do is we want to factor the greatest common factor from each binomial. Okay, so this at this point, we're going to say we're going to look just at the first two terms. I don't even care about the second two terms right now. They could not exist to me right now. I'm not going to look at them. I'm only going to look at the first two terms. And I'm going to ask myself, well, what can I pull out of the first two terms? Well, they don't have any coefficients in common, but they both have x squareds, right? I can divide an x squared out of this guy and an x squared out of that guy. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to get an x squared out of there. All right, and what's going to be left inside my parentheses? Well, x cubed divided by x squared is x. 7x squared divided by x squared is just 7. Okay. Plus, let's do the same thing to the other guy. What can I divide out of both 2x and 14? Well, I can divide a 2 out, right? 2 divided by 2 is 1. So I'm going to divide that 2 out. So let's bring it out. And what's going to be left inside of my parentheses? 2x divided by 2 is just x, plus 14 divided by 2 is 7. Okay, so what did I do? I split my expression into two separate expressions almost, okay, it felt like. And I identified and factored out a greatest common factor from each binomial. Now we have two different terms here. I've got this guy and I've got this guy. Okay, those are my two terms in this expression, this whole expression. So I want to see what can I pull out of there? What can I factor out of there? What factor do they have in common? I'm going to give you a clue. Look at the purple. Okay, what did we just what was left inside of both parentheses? Okay, what was left inside of both parentheses was the x plus 7. So you can divide both of these terms by x plus 7. That's the greatest common factor. Okay, so what am I going to do? I'm going to pull it out, x plus 7. And what's going to be left? Okay, so this is the factoring out that common binomial. Well, I have an x squared plus 2x, or plus 2, sorry. And then this is your, I'm sorry, I don't know why I put a squared right. Yes, x squared plus 2. Okay, and so this is your final factored form. Okay, if you'd like to check, you can distribute. All right, so let's do some examples. All right, number 1. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to group both of these together. Now always make sure you have a plus sign in between there, okay? All right, after that, identify what your greatest common factor is in each of your binomials. So in my first binomial, I can divide out an x squared. Okay. So I'm going to do so. And then in my second binomial, maybe we'll just do both of them right now. My second binomial, I can divide out an 8. Okay. And so the main idea here is that after you pull these common factors out, what you want is whatever's left inside your parentheses, you want them to be the same. Like in our example above, we had x plus 7. Those were the same. So I have x squared And what's left inside of there? Well, x cubed divided by x squared is x. 4x squared divided by x squared is 4. Plus, okay, let's pull out that 8. And now 8x divided by 8 is x, plus 32 divided by 8 is 4. Okay, now we're on to the second part of the factoring method by grouping, where we're going to once again look at my two terms and factor out the greatest common factor. Now, this looks kind of crazy that this here, right here, is in fact a term, because now what I have is I have a product of two things. I have a product of x squared and this term right here, x plus 4, okay? So this is a single term, and then this would be a single term in my expression as well. So what do they have in common? They have an x plus 4. Okay, they have an x plus 4 in common. So what happens is I get to pull out that x plus 4. Okay, and then what do I have left? Well, I have this x squared plus, and then I have the 8. All right, and I'm done. So let's do this very quickly. Let's just check to make sure we're doing this right. If we distribute, okay, what would we have? Well, we have x times x squared is x cubed. X times 8 is going to be positive 8x. 4 times x squared is a positive 4x squared plus 32. Is that what I have up here? Yeah, that's what I started with. So I know that I did this right. Okay, I'm gonna leave number 2 for you guys to do. All right, let's look at number 3. Now, when you make your grouping just like this, what happened right there? What did I tell you to not have in between your groupings? The minus, okay? You always want it to be a plus sign. A minus is really just a quick way to say plus a negative number, okay? So if I say 3 minus 1, that's a shortcut to saying 3 plus a negative 1. Okay, so that's what I want to do. I want to make sure that there's a plus sign. And the reason is that if I just put a parentheses right here, what you did was you now said that this minus sign that was just affecting the 8w a second ago is now affecting both of your terms. And we can't have that. Okay, so to fix it, what I do is I change this to a plus sign and I make the next term negative. So that's going to be a negative 8w. Okay, so that's just going to be our quick fix. So if the second sign, if this middle sign is a minus sign, what I want you to do is change it to a plus and then make that next term negative. Okay, so let's do our grouping now. So it's a negative 8w. All right, so I have w cubed and a 5w squared. So what can I factor out of both of those? Well, I can factor out a w squared. Okay. And then what can I factor out of both of these terms? Um, let's do this actually first. Let's do my factoring over here. Let's take out this w squared. I want to show you something. I want to make sure that we understand what we're going to be factoring in the next one. Well, w cubed divided by w squared is just w. 5w squared divided by w squared is just 5. Okay, so we have a w plus 5 right here, okay, a w plus 5. So ideally, after we're done factoring a common factor between these two terms, I want there to be a w plus 5 left, okay, a positive w plus a positive 5. So I noticed that both of the terms in my second binomial are negative. how do we turn negative numbers into positive numbers? Okay, what we're gonna do is, since I want those numbers to be positive, I'm gonna factor out the negative 8. Okay, I'm gonna factor out the negative 8. So make sure that you're always kind of being aware of what you want to factor out. So um, we have plus a negative 8. And then what do we have left? Well, negative W, 8W divided by negative 8 is just W. Negative 40 divided by negative 8 is a positive 5. You notice how I don't have that subtraction sign anymore because I divided a negative divided by a negative. Okay, so now what's your common factor? What's your binomial? We have a W plus 5 we can pull out. Okay, we have that W plus 5 we can pull out. So I have W plus 5. And then what else is left? I have a W squared plus a negative 8. Now, does anybody else not like having plus a negative number? Yeah, now that we're done doing all of our math, let's just go ahead and change that back to a minus sign, because minus signs are effective, especially for communication, right? It makes it a lot easier to read. So we'll just make it W squared minus 8, okay? All right. I'm going to go ahead and let's leave number 4 for you guys to do. And let's do a couple more. So number 5, we'll start the same way. We're going to group that, but this is a minus sign, so let's do plus a negative. Okay, so always remember to do that. All right, now what can I divide evenly out of the first 2 terms? Well, I think I can take p cubed out. Okay, so I've got, what am I going to have? A p cubed, and then what's left inside will be a p squared minus a 6. Okay, so I want whatever's left after I'm done factoring my second term, after I fact out my common factor, I want it to be a positive p squared minus 6. Now, if you notice, if I would determine to just, let's say, factor out a positive 2, okay, let's just say this for a second. Let's just see what happens. I would have plus a positive 2 times, negative 2 divided by 2 is a negative p squared plus 6. Did this match up? Not quite yet, okay? It's that minus sign in front of the p instead of in front of the 6. So how do you fix that? Well, instead of pulling out a positive 2, let's go ahead and factor out a negative 2, okay? This should fix our problem. So we'll have plus a negative 2, and what's going to be left? Well, negative 2 divided by negative 2, negative 2p squared divided by negative 2 is negative p, is just p squared, and then positive 12 divided by negative 2, positive divided by a negative, is a negative 6. So now my 2 binomials match up, the p squared minus 6 and the p squared minus 6. So that's what I can divide out of these terms now. Okay, I get to take out that p squared minus 6 and p squared minus 6. So what are we left with? So I got p squared minus 6. And then inside my next parentheses, I have p cubed, and I'm just going to say minus 2. Now, one thing that you do want to be careful of is that when you factor, guys, it's always a process, right? Sometimes you got to keep factoring. And so we should be aware that sometimes after we've done this, that maybe one of our factors could still be broken down more. And the reason I am pausing right now is I'm looking at this guy right here. This is two terms, okay? It's a subtraction. And I know at least one of the terms is a square, right? Maybe we could use the difference of squares method. Now it's an interesting thought, but with this one, it's not going to work out, okay? Because the 6 is not a perfect square, okay? If this 6 were, say, a 4 or a 16 or a 36 or a 49, we would be able to continue to factor this by factoring this guy using the difference of squares method. But on these first examples, they just have one technique that they're using, okay? Um, all right, let's leave number 3 for you guys to do. Okay. Okay, so my first thing that I always do is going to be group my first two terms and my second two terms together. Oops, sorry. All right, and good, I got a plus sign in between them. Perfect. All right, what can I factor out of the first two terms? Well, I can factor out a 3x squared. That's my greatest common factor, okay? And then, so what does that look like? 3x squared. What do I have left inside of that parentheses? I have an x minus 7. Okay, so I want to make sure there's an x minus 7 in this next term, or this next, what's remaining. So this is good. I have a positive and a negative. That's exactly what I want. So I'm just going to pull out a positive 4. Okay, so this is going to be plus a positive. I'm going to take out that 4. And now what's left inside of my parentheses? I have an x minus 7. All right, perfect. Now I'm going to take out that x minus 7 from each of those pieces. And what do I have left? Well, I have a 3x squared plus that 4. Okay, so what did I do? I pulled that x plus 7 out of both of those terms. Okay, I pulled that x squared, x minus 7 out of both of those terms. And what was left? Well, you had the 3x squared plus that 4. Okay, I'll leave number 8 for you guys. Number 9, let's do our grouping. All right, this is a minus sign, so make sure you do change it to plus a negative, okay? So if when you're doing that grouping, you want to make sure that in between your groupings, you have a positive. All right, what can we factor out of the first two terms? Well, I can factor out, looks like an 8a squared. 8a squared. Okay, and then so I've got an 8a squared times what's left inside my parentheses? Well, I'm left with a 2a plus 8a squared divided by 8a squared is 1. Okay, so we have two positive numbers left inside of my parentheses. So I want to make sure that when I pull out my greatest common factor that I still have two positive numbers. I have a negative 6a and a negative 3. So when I pull it out, I want to make sure that I'm pulling out a negative number so that both of those end up turning positive. So I'm going to pull out plus, I'm going to pull out my negative 3. And then I'm left with a positive 2 and a positive 1. Okay, right? Because negative 6 divided by negative 3 is a positive 2. Oh, positive 2a. Pardon me. And then negative 3 divided by negative 3 is a positive 1. We divide these terms now by the 2a plus 1. Okay, the 2a plus 1. And then after we pull that out, 2a plus 1, okay, I'm going to pull it out of there because when you divide, what are you going to be left with? You're going to be left with an 8a squared, and I'm just going to write minus 3. Okay, forget that plus a negative number at that point. Okay, and that's it. You're factored. Okay, guys, I'm going to leave number 2 for you guys to do. All right, 11. Let's do 11. So always, first thing, group both of your sets of terms. Good, I got a plus sign already. All right, my first set, I have, what do I have to divide out of there? I have a 4x that I can divide evenly into both of those terms. Okay, so let's go ahead and pull that 4x out. All right, and what are you going to be left with? Well, you'll be left with 2x plus 3. All right, and then what should we pull out of here? I think I have a common factor of y. All right, so let's pull that y out of there. And what are we left with? Those will go away, so we'll be left with 2x plus 3. All right, now on for our second round of factoring the greatest common factor. Okay, now out of these two terms, I can take this 2x plus 3 out. Here, the 2x plus 3 out. Okay, and so after I take that out, 2x plus 3, what am I going to be left with? Well, those go away. Those will go away, right? So I'll be left with a 4x plus, what am I left with in that second guy? Y. All right, and so kind of wrote that a little bit further out to kind of show you what's going on. That y is just going straight down, that 4x is going straight down. So the final answer is 2x plus 3 times 4x plus y. Okay, all right, let's look at number 13. All right, so in my first two terms, I got these two and these two, I got a plus sign between there, good. I can divide out, it looks like an a squared. An a squared. And then my second two, it looks like I can divide out a b. Okay. So a, pull out the a squared. What am I left with in here? A cubed divided by a squared is a, plus, those will go away and you'll be left with b. Plus, I'm going to pull out my b. And I'll be left with a plus b. All right, let's do our next round of factoring the greatest common factor between those two. And it looks like I can pull out an a plus b. So like I said, the idea of the factoring is going to be that after you're done manipulating your two terms, you're going to, by using that greatest common factor first, you're going to be left with the same thing inside of your parentheses. Okay, so then that way you get to pull that one out. So I have an a plus b, then an a plus b that I'm going to pull out. And then what will I have left? Well, I'll have this a squared plus b. Okay, a squared plus b. All right, so I'll leave number 14 for you guys. All right, and we're actually just going to skip this last section. If you want to try and go for it, if you feel like we didn't get enough work in today, but pretty much what you just have to do is kind of rearrange the terms so that they ideally work with this grouping method, but we'll just skip them for our class.